Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about judging, specifically critiquing judging. And this is going to be a follow-up on last episode's discussion about judging innovation. Before we get started, I'd like to mention to everybody that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by members of TheChocolateLife. And here is the homepage of TheChocolateLife right now. You can go there, you can click on the green button in the top nav and join if you're not currently a member. There's always a free membership tier, but of course, if you have the financial resources to support what it is that I'm doing, I'm not doing it network advertising, I don't do Patreon or anything like that, you can go click the join button and subscribe to one of the tiers that support the work that I do here. I also want to point out that no matter where you are watching from today in the world, you can go into the live chat in YouTube or to the comments in LinkedIn or Facebook, and you can give me a quick shout out. Just let me know where in the world you're coming from, watching from. I will get that up on screen. Or if you have a question or you have a comment about anything that I'm going to be talking about today, you can let me know. I'll get that up on screen and I will attempt to answer the question. So for every post, for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post, and this is the post for today's episode. So you can go there. You don't have to grab the URLs. You don't have to follow along. You don't need to link to anything. You can just go to this post on the Chocolate Life, and you can get all the links and the run of the show and all that you need. So you can follow along during the live episode or after the fact. You can go to this page and you can click on all of the links that are mentioned if you want to do any follow-up. And with all that out of the way, let's begin. So going back to the early part of my career as a chocolate critic. So in the years leading up to first going online with chocophile.com, I realized that if I was going to be a professional chocolate critic, I needed to have a system for rating and reviewing chocolate. And the question is, what does a rating system need to look like if you're going to be a chocolate critic? How are you going to go put it together? What other kinds of rating systems are there out there? If you're looking at chocolate, would you be looking at a rating system in wine? Would you be looking at rating and reviewing systems for beer or spirits or cheese or any other kind of gourmet food? And you need to take, well, I don't know that you need to take these things into account, but I decided to take these into account when I was thinking about how I put together a rating and reviewing a system for chocolate. And it all looking back on it, it all revolved around creating what I think of as a rubric. And a rubric is just an evaluation tool or a set of guidelines that is used to promote, and I'm reading, right? It's a rubric is an evaluation tool or a set of guidelines used to promote the consistent application of expectations, objectives, or standards. So you want to have a rubric, and that rubric is going to set out what you are going to be judging, what elements of something you're going to be judging, and the scale that you're going to use to give your responses, right? So that when somebody looks at the reviews that you give to something, if you give it a number or you give it something, they'll be able to figure out what it is that you mean. And the better a job you do at describing what and how, and perhaps to some extent why you're rating something, the more complex, the better fleshed out the rubric is, the easier it is going for somebody to look at what it is that you're doing and be able to understand how you arrived at the results. So again, I said that this was a follow-up to last week's episode. There is a link, this is Tuesday, so this is last Friday's episode about judging innovation in cocoa. And one of the reasons why I came back to revisit this topic is because there is a comment at the bottom of that page, and I realized that by the time I got to the episode, I didn't get to that comment. And that comment was, how would I, if I were starting today, what kind of system would I use? What kind of judging rubric would I use? And that forms the basis for what it is that I'm talking about today. So this is going over the history and some alternatives ways of judging and to talk about these things today. So hope you'll go there. So early on, so this is early on. When I say early on, I'm saying 1997 into 1998, I started exploring numerical rating systems. And these were primarily influenced by Wine Spectator magazine, and publications like that. Generally, they ended up with a number like 96 or 82 or some number like that. And then there would be followed by that tasting notes. But there was, while the tasting notes were an attempt to describe what the wine was like, plummy, jammy, whatever the, raspberry, tobacco, whatever the flavors were, the number I felt was devoid of any personality. It's like 82. What does an 82 tell you? Does it give you any kind of information about um, the person who is rating and reviewing the wine? And the answer is it absolutely doesn't. You don't know anything about them. And what you end up having to do, in my experience, this comes out of thinking about reviews for movies. So for example, about this time, I was been living in a place where I had friends, and we'd go to a movie every weekend. And we're in New York City, lots of movie theaters to choose from. And I realized very soon that I could look at a review by Rex Reed and I could determine whether or not I wanted to go to the movie. If Rex Reed liked the movie, chances are I wasn't going to. And if he hated the movie, chances are I was going to like it. And that came from reading a lot of Rex Reed reviews and seeing a lot of those movies and detecting a pattern. And one of the things that I think that a numerical rating system does is it doesn't make it easy to pick out this kind of pattern. It's like if you go to this wine person and you understand that, oh, they give something a 92, you don't know how they arrived at the 92. Do you like it? Do you not like it? How did they arrive at that 92? You need to do a lot of work and able to understand how they are arriving at their result. And so I spent, a lot of time thinking about this, perhaps overthinking it. And again, my number one criticism, I don't know if you can read this. Let me see if I can make it a little larger. But my number one criticism is that numerical rating systems are devoid of personality. The results are a number, 82, 75, 96. They don't tell you anything about the reviewer or the process of arriving at the final score. Another criticism I have of numerical rating systems is they're abstract. On a scale of 1 to 10, what does 7 mean? On a scale of 1 to 100, right? What does a 70 mean? I mean, we know it's better than a 69 and it's not as good as a 72, right? But is 70, relative to 100? What does that mean relative to 50? What does it mean? Right? Then you got this question, what's better, a 1 to 10 rating system or a 1 to 100 rating system? So if you're going to do 1 to 10 and you've got a 7.5 as a number, why don't you just go to 100 and give it 75? Right? What's better? I don't know the answer to that question. I think sort of in my mind, I think that 1 to 100 is in some respects better for discrimination. But one of the challenges with any kind of numerical rating system that you're working on is that it needs a calculator. So for example, let's say that you are going to have categories, judging categories. You're going to take the way it looks and the way it smells and the way it tastes. And then there's going to be a technical aspect of, like, for how does it snap, for example, how well is it tempered? So you've got a number of different categories. And what you're going to do is you're going to say, hey, well, taste is going to be 40% of the score, and the way it looks is 10, and the way it smells is 10, and these technical categories are going to be 10, and maybe there are a few others, right? And what you're going to judge on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 in each one of those categories. And then once you get done, you have to say, well, I gave a 7 out of 10 on this category, but it's worth 40% of the score. So you need to do some math and you need to run the numbers based on the weights. And if one reviewer has a different weighting system, even though they have the same categories. If two or more people are using different weighting systems, it's not directly comparable. But there's no way in your head to easily go and say, if you're doing a numerical rating system and you are using weighting at the same time, how do you go and arrive at a number? And then you run into the problem of math and precision, which is, if you're doing this on a 1 to 100 scale, then you might end up with something like 72.57, just because that's the way the math works. And that's an artifact. That 0.57 is an artifact of the math. So would you round it up to 76? Would you round it up to 75.6? How would you go about doing it? Because no person's sense of taste, can discriminate to 2 parts in 1,000 or 1 part in 1,000. It's unrealistic. So one of the things that you might take a look at with a numerical rating system is how many digits of precision. Is it 75? Right? Is it 75.5? Is it 75.54? It tells you about the math that they're using, but don't be fooled into thinking that just because it's more precise, it's better. That's just a function of mathematics. And the more judges you have, for example, if you've got a judging panel and you've got a bunch of scores that you have to mix together and come up with an average or some sort of sum, then it turns out that the likelihood of those last couple of digits being just an artifact of the mathematics is much, much higher. There's value in it there's value in those numbers, right? If you're trying to differentiate, who is really first, if the scores are very, very close, or if you're going to give this person a gold award or a silver award, there needs to be a cutoff. And sometimes the differences between a gold award and a silver award can literally be 2/100ths of a point. That's not because one product is 2/100ths of a point better than another one. It's just that that's the way the math works, right? And there are examples of it, and I'll point you to some examples of that. Right? The other thing that's a real challenge about numerical rating systems for me, is that the numbers have an inherent bias. And what do I mean by that? So what I mean is that between an 87 rating and an 89 rating, they're just two numbers, right? It's the difference is two: 87, 88, 89, just two. And the difference between 89 and 91 is just two. But the 87 and 89 start with 8, and the 91 starts with 9. And we just have this psychological bias that anything that begins with a 9 is much, much better than anything that begins with an 8. And this is one of the challenges of the inherent bias of a rating system. You can have a very little difference, 89 to 91, but the psychological perception is much, much greater than something that starts with a 9 and something that starts with an 8. And this is just an inherent flaw, in my opinion, in numerical rating systems. But when it comes down to, and this is when I mentioned this again, is that when you judge in panels, some of this is unavoidable, right? Which is, if you're using a weighting system and you have two or more judges and you need to average all the scores together, what you're going to end up with digits of precision to the left of the decimal point. And one of the things that you have to decide, or that the organizers of the rating system have to decide, is what they're going to do with those extra numbers to the right of the decimal point. As I said, for large judging panels, having those digits of precision is going to give the organizers the ability to make very, very fine discriminatory judges, and not just judgments, and not discriminatory in the sense of racial discrimination or other kinds of discrimination. It's just that when we have two entries that have scores that are very, very close to each other, right, that second digit of precision is going to enable us to, which is a level of discrimination, is going to enable us to decide that this one received a higher score than that one. That's all that I mean. That is, and when you're judging in a group, when you have a judging panel, that's important. But it's also important, I think, to explain how you deal with these numbers and what you do with them. Right? And we'll get to that as I start, critiquing systems. But if you are an individual, right, then the idea of having a whole lot of precision to the right of the decimal place makes zero sense whatsoever. You're implying that your sense of taste is able to discriminate to one part in 100 or two parts in 1,000, and that's not likely true, right? So can you discriminate? What is the difference between a 76 and a 77 if that's where the math lies? What does it mean to be 1 point better, right? What does it mean to be a 77 as opposed to 76, right? If you're doing that kind of scale, if you were to do a 1 to 10 scale, we might say 7 is better than 6 and 8 is better than 7. And so that discrimination is a little easier to understand because the difference between the numbers is greater, right? 70 as opposed to 80, but the difference between 71 and 72, how do you go about talking about it? So think about that when you're putting together your judging system, your judging rubric. How are you going to deal with these numbers? What are you trying to communicate, right? To whom are you trying to communicate is another huge issue. Are you communicating with professionals? Then maybe something that's got more precision is better. If you're communicating with members of the general public, then maybe less precision makes more sense, right? But pay attention to it because it does make a difference as to not just what you're communicating and how you're communicating, but it also informs how you go about approaching the actual evaluation process. And so, which is perhaps not quite as obvious, but it turns out to be quite important. But what do you think? If you have, if you're judging chocolate for fun or for profit, if you're doing this as a hobby or you're doing it because it's part of your job, let me know. How do you put together your rating system? Where did you go? What were your influences? What did you look at? Have you taken something wholesale? Have you tried to create something of your own? Right? This was huge for me back in the late 1990s because there were no places anyone could go to learn any of this stuff. Now, if I wanted to become a master of wine, I could go take a WSET or some other course and I could go get trained. If I wanted to go and become a beer judge, Michael Jackson's The World Guide to Beer had done a really good job of establishing judging criteria and guidelines. So those were available. But in the late 1990s, nothing was available when it came to chocolate. Right? And that was why it took me 4 years of thinking about this and trying things down and rating things and abandoning them and doing something else. Right? And what I learned during this exploration, is I took away from my work in developing user interfaces and user experiences for computer graphic software and for projects on the internet. I did my first internet project in 1996. I started designing user interfaces and user experiences for computer graphic software in 1983. So I've been doing this for quite some time. I had developed color picking algorithms that were used for business graphic software that were sold by IBM's application systems division, the precursors to PowerPoint and things like that. So I'd been thinking about all this for quite some time and spent some time thinking about information theory. I was colleagues with a gentleman named Richard Saul Wurman, Ricky, who was the author of a book called Information Anxiety. I had met a gentleman by the name of Don Norman, who was a design expert who was talking about things like affordances. So I had this background and I was thinking about what all of these influences meant and how could I apply them when it came to chocolate. Right? And one of the things that I took away from this is sort of a basic design philosophy, right? Was around the notion of 7 plus or minus 2. So in any kind of user experience, right, the human brain is really good at dealing with numbers that are between 5 and 9, which is where the 7 plus or minus 2. So in general, if you have 10 or more things on your list, you're probably being too fine-grained, right? you need to think a way to consolidate some of the things that are there, right? Because you're putting a extra cognitive burden on the person who's looking at this to keep track of things. If you have only four, for example, you might want to think about adding a few more categories, a little bit more discrimination. So 7 plus or minus 2. This is based on research that was done by Bell Labs. It's one of the reasons why here in the United States, the telephone numbers are 3-4. We have 7-digit telephone numbers. We have a triplet and a quad because something like 3335271, right, is a pattern that is really, really easy for us to wrap our brains around. And it turns out that this concept can be extended in lots of interesting and useful ways. That if you come up with a rating system where there are 10 or more things that you're looking at, you probably want to consolidate some things. If you have a rating system where you're looking at 4 or fewer things, then you might want to add some, with the ideal number being 7 things, right? And it's based on years and years of psychological research. So keeping that in mind, back in 2001, when I finally introduced my rating system for TheChocolateLife.com, this is the rubric that I invented for the original ChocolateLife.com rating system. I decided that I didn't want to have a straightforward rating system that just put a number up there, 6 or 67, right? Or there was a number 67, right? And just some tasting notes. Right? I didn't want to do something which was that limited. So what I ended up putting together was a rubric which included one axis of variables around the price. So I went to market researchers, I read some market research reports, and I realized that they were talking about some really distinct price ranges in their reports. So they were talking about the mass market price range. So this is what you'd find on, grocery store shelves, non-specialty retail. And generally at the time, this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, mass market was considered to be anything $15 a pound or less. The next scale up, mass market premium, was $15 to $25 a pound. Then there was a gourmet category of $25 to $35 a pound, and then above $35 a pound. And I felt that I needed to add another price category. But in the end, I ended up with a price range: mass market premium, gourmet, and prestige. I decided that mass market was candy, and I wasn't going to touch it. You could go in if you wanted to score, if you wanted to find somebody who's going to rate and review, Snickers bars and Mars bars and things like that. That wasn't what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about specialty chocolate, the thing that you'd go to a gourmet store. And so I focused on mass market premium, gourmet, and prestige price range. So that's what it. And I was upfront. I let people know on ChocolateLife.com that this is what I was doing. Right. The other thing is that I had decided that there were 4 styles of chocolate. Now, thinking about this from the position of, what is it, 20 some odd years later, I would have done these styles. Knowing what it is that I know now, I would have done these styles very different. But at the time, I decided that there were 4 styles. I was going to take whatever it was that I was rating and reviewing, and I'm going to apply it to a style, Northern European style. So Northern European had a tendency to be lighter and sweeter. There was less of an emphasis on the flavors of whatever the fillings were, and often it was about the decoration of the piece. So we think about, Belgian seashells, for example. So Belgium and Switzerland would have been examples of Northern European style chocolate. Right? A Southern European style chocolate, France, Italy, Spain, had a tendency to be darker, a little bit more bitter, right? And so I said, okay, there's a fundamental difference between those 2 styles. And whether or not you agreed with me about the names that I used, right? When I said, here's a chocolate and it is the Northern European style, you should expect it to be lighter and sweeter, right? The difference between a sweetened cafe latte and an espresso. For example, that would be one way to characterize the differences. Right? And so it turned out that there was the third category, which is called American. So you think about American style chocolate, uh, you know, right? It's sweet, tend to be sweeter than Northern European, and there was no subtlety about the flavor. If something was mint, it would beat you over the head and say, I'm mint. Or if something said it was orange, it would be orange. Whereas a Southern European style chocolate, sort of a French style chocolate, the flavors might be subtle, right? To the point where what is this flavor? It was really about the chocolate, then about the flavor, right? So this was another way of explaining the differences. And there was a paragraph of explanation for how I described each one of these styles. And then, in the early 2000s, so this is, um, working with the organizers of the World Pastry Forum and the World Pastry and National Pastry Team Championships, I added this Nouvelle American style or Nouvelle French style. And what did that mean? So it was a hybrid of the American style and the French style. It was chocolate forward, the flavors were there, they were identifiable, and chocolate was at the end. It wasn't bang you over the head, and it wasn't really subtle in the flavor, but chocolate was an important element. And one of the reasons why I added it is because there were a lot of French MOFs, though, so French chocolatiers, pâtissiers, who had come to the United States, Las Vegas particularly, and they were adapting their recipes to American palates. Right? They needed something which was more flavor forward than what was in Europe. Right? And that's where this Nouvelle American or Nouvelle French style came from. So I had 4 price ranges. I only focused on 3 of them, and I had 4 different styles. And so I could say something, this is a Northern European style chocolate in the gourmet price range, right? Or this is a Southern European style chocolate in the prestige price range. So we're talking about the concept of value here, which is not really something that I've seen in other rating systems. So, but it was important to me that I think of something that was very, very different from what I've had been seen before. And then I had a 7-point rating scale. And one of the things that I thought was really important, again, for rating scales is not only were there were this magic number 7, right, which you can see here to the right ranking, right, but it was also important that it was an odd number. And one of the reasons why it's important that it was an odd number is you have a middle point and then the same number above and the same number below, right? So if you've got an even number, it's like you get like 6, 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and there's no middle point. There's above the middle and there's below the middle, but there's no middle. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to use descriptive words, at least start. So for example, 1 was not worth the calories, right? So I could have a rating of a chocolate that was in the Nouvelle American style in the prestige category that wasn't worth the calories. So for the price, I told you what I think of. It's like I don't think it's worth it. Or it was very poor. It was poor. It was ordinary. And I chose ordinary for a reason because I thought ordinary was damning with faint praise in a way that average wasn't. I think there's a subtle psychological and important psychological difference between something being average and something be ordinary. That also gave me the opportunity to say this is extraordinary. And that was my rubric for the original Chocophile rating system back in 2001. It focused around the concept of value. It had 3 major axes of comparison: price, range, style, and a ranking, right? And it had um, a number of different price ranges, a number of different styles, and a number of different rankings. And the idea being, again, around this notion of projecting value or talking about the value. At $25 a pound, this product was extraordinary, right? If it were $45 a pound, I might have given it a lower rating because my expectations for things that are more expensive, right? So it was really a way to talk about that concept of value and what happens when you reach a boundary, like what's the difference between 89 and 91. It became a way to express that in a way that, again, I still haven't seen anybody do before. That's what I did in 2001. What I'm going to share next is the International Chocolate Awards judging rubric. So what you can do is there's a link, and you can click on this link, and it will take you to I'm sorry, this is the Academy of Chocolate Awards page first. And the reason why I did this is because the Academy of Chocolate Awards predates the International Chocolate Awards. So you can go to this, and it will tell you what their judging protocol is. To some extent, what they'll do is they'll say, we will judge on things like aroma, texture, formulation, and we're going to use a 5-point rating scale, right? Except in some cases, we're going to use a 4-point rating scale. And they give this what. So there is a description of what they're doing and how, and this is what their rubric looks like right here. So we have, they're going to judge on aroma, they're going to judge on texture, formulation, taste, execution, mouthfeel, and aftertaste. And then they have a 5-point rating system: very poor, poor, average, good, and excellent. In reality, this works out to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Doesn't really matter. The math is pretty much the same. So but what they also don't tell you here is that they don't tell you if they weight these criteria, if they value aroma the same way they value texture, or do they value texture the same way they value formulation, right? Is texture worth more than formulation, right? And for me, as somebody who wants to pay attention to the awards and is interested in judging processes, the fact that there is no indication about what the way these things are weighted. And for example, are we using all of these for all categories? So they have a bar category, and in robed bonbon, there's a spreads category, there is a hot chocolate category. Are they using all 5 of these in all 5 categories? It's not explained. It's their competition; they don't have to explain it. Um, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just telling you this is what it is, and this is where I think they could do a better job of communicating what it is that they're doing. I think that the more open and the more transparent these organizers are about what they're doing and how they do it, was very, very helpful, not only for the people who are looking at the awards and wondering how, why did this company get a gold and why did this company get a silver? I tasted the 2 of them, and I think that's backwards. Right? So I want to understand how the awards were arrived at, but it's also really good for the companies that are entering the awards to have a better understanding about how the judging process is done. Right? And so I would like to see more information about this, more information presented about, oh, that's why it's good. Huh. I wondered why that. Anyway, I just noticed an editing error that I didn't catch earlier this morning when I updated something for me to do afterwards. And that's one of the reasons why I do these when I do these posts for every podcast episode, is it gives me an opportunity to make mistakes and to correct them later, and then to add things in. For example, if you have a competition where you know what the judging rubric is, let me know. Put it in the comments. What I will do is I will go take a look at the competition. I'll take a look at the judging rubric, and I'll add it to this page, and it will just become a reference that people can use. So that was the Academy of Chocolate Awards process. Just really, really quickly, in case you don't know, when you go to the Academy of Chocolate Awards, what you can do is you can click on this 2024 awards. You can find out the winners of the 2024 awards and previous winners. So you do have access to all of the winners for all of the previous awards. I don't understand why some of them are organized the way they are. There's not a whole lot of creativity in this page, but you can get access to the awards going all the way back to 2005. And one of the things that you'll learn is that there has been an evolution in the categories that have been awarded over the period of time. When we go to the International Chocolate Awards, the judging system used by the International Chocolate Awards is explained on this page. So it's here, right? Um, will take a while. So this is an interesting thing that they're trying to do. They're trying to manage subjectivity. So, and I think it's perhaps the the greater contribution, the most valuable contribution that the International Chocolate Awards has made, is that it says all of the judges have come from different places. They come from different food cultures. They might have different training, different kinds of backgrounds, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to try to zero in and calibrate on a palette, and then be able to do something which is realizing that each judge is going to be a, is going to make a subjective judgment. How do we make it as objective as possible? I think that's really, really an interesting concept, and I think that perhaps the most valuable concept that the International Chocolate Awards has given. So you've got samples of what their forms look like, or portions of forms, all that kind of stuff. If you go down to the bottom of this page, however, if you go take a look at this, we're in 2025. I don't understand where I'm still looking at 2014 forms. But if I actually go and click on this form, it's actually not the judging form. It's another form. If I do it in Italian, these are in fact the judging forms. So I don't know what it is that's going on. Let me see if I can, it's going to open up, excuse me, in a different window. This is not the judging form that they talk about. This is the pre-judging round. There's a triage round. If they get 500 entries in a particular year, then what they're going to do is they're going to try to reduce that number. So they're going to try to filter out everything which a group of judges believes isn't worthy of judging isn't worthy of judging. So they're going to do some triage. And if you go click on this form right here, what you get is the triage form. You don't actually get the judging form. And you get something which is now a decade old. Now, I have had correspondence with Martin Christie, and he says they're in the process of redoing this. But there are aspects of their redoing this which are now years old, and they're quite behind about it. But listen, I do a website. There are 1,600 posts on the website, over 1,600 posts. I've got things that I try to manage on a regular basis, and keeping something perfectly up to date is a real challenge. I understand, right, just how difficult it can be. But you can go and take a look at the judging system and forms, right? So what they do here is they have a very simple rubric when it comes to judging the chocolate, and their execution on a scale of 1 to 5, formulation on a scale of 1 to 5, interpretation on a scale of 1 to 5, taste on a scale of 1 to 5, and should this product be considered for an award on a scale of 1 to 5. And what I've done is, this is going to be a little, so I'm using the images that they provided because I can't download the forms and do my own screenshots. But I have execution is 15% of total, formulation is 30% of total, style is 15% of total. It's cut off for taste, but you can see what they do is they have a prompt. So for execution, a 1 is substandard, a 2 is competent, a 3 is skilled, a 4 is exemplary, a 5 is immaculate, right? And these are one-word prompts. In this particular case, that will let the judge know how to score. And it's simple and straightforward, and quite well designed for large panel judging, right? And it has evolved over the course of many years. They've done a really good job in this aspect of it, right? So formulation is 30% of the score. Notice that taste per se is not, right, part of the score. So formulation, commodity type ingredients, number 1, obsessive quality, uncompromising recipe. Now, to the best of my knowledge, none of the judges is given the actual recipe, right? These are supposed to be judged blind. And so we're guessing at the recipe based on taste. We're guessing on obsessive quality, uncompromising recipe based solely on visual, right, observation smelling it and tasting it. So we, to the best of my knowledge, the last time I judged in the International Chocolate Awards. So I judged in the U.S. the America round 3 or 4 years in New York and New Jersey, and I was a judge at the World round in London on at least 2 different occasions, 2 for years. All right. I've also been a judge at the Peruvian competition on 2 different occasions. So I do have some experience with working it. But this is a perfectly acceptable rubric. And as I say, what they have going for it is they have evolved it, and there are very, very clear instructions for the judges. So what this tells me is if I have this judge, right? If I have this judging sheet, I know what it is that the judges have been asked to judge. Really important. I know what the judges are judging, and I know what the prompts they're being used. So I don't know the individual scores of any product, and I don't know what judges are saying things, but I know that I know what the judges are being asked to do. And in that respect, really good job by the organizers of the awards. So the next thing to think about, again, these images are a different size, so they're uh, um, that's why they change size here. The images themselves are different size. There is this question: do you think that this entry deserves an award? And for me, when I was a judge, I mean, this was a really interesting concept. And what it allowed, I often went to this gestalt, especially if I was doing bonbons or enrobed items. I would taste something and I would go, this sucks, right? So, and not a contender. I would go there first, right? And then I would work backwards from the other ones and try to work into it. So, give this entry an award: a strong contender, can contend, marginal contender, not a contender. Again, this is a really, really solid example of what the judges are being asked to consider. And I think it's really, really good that the organizers are being this upfront uh, with the public. And so, this is a different size. And then I think we're done with, I need to make this smaller. And then there's another part of the form which is difficult to see, which is around feedback. So you organize the feedback according to execution, formulation, interpretation, and taste, which is 40% of the score. So 15, 30, 15, 40. That's the way this works. So you have positive and negative feedback. Texture, you can't read the prompts here, but if you were able to download the English forms, you'd be able to understand what the prompts were. But again, straight out prompts before the judges knowing exactly what it is they're being asked to do, right? And that, I think that's really, really cool. And I don't know of another awards competition that goes to this level of detail in order to be able to explain to the judges what they're being asked to do. Now, it's also important to know that these days, all that judging is also these days, the judging is done online. That, when I started out, they were using paper forms like this, right? But now what they're doing is you go online, and there are each one of there is, you type in the number of an entry, and then you're given a form, and you fill out the form, and you click enter, right? And then you go on to the next one. So these days, all of this work is being done electronically, because it took hours and hours and days. If you had 12 judges judging 300 different things, tallying up the results took a lot of time and was error prone. And so moving into an online system made an enormous amount of sense. So that is the International Chocolate Awards. So they have 5 elements: execution, formulation, interpretation, and taste. The question of, is this a contender for an award? And then there's a scale of 1 to 5 with prompts. This is what you're supposed to consider. So if you were to do a rubric like this that you wanted to communicate to people, you're a professional chocolate critic, you are doing this for fun, you're doing this for fun at home, right? Not a bad way to go. Be this specific. Use your own words, use your own phrases, personalize it, make it your own. Don't necessarily follow this. As a matter of fact, the forms themselves are copyrighted. And I made a little note here. that the images are dated from 2012. They may not be current, but the images used here are under fair use provisions under copyright law for the purpose of education and criticism, because there is a copyright, you can't use these forms kind of notice. So if you want to use these, right, you can download them and you can use them, but you can't publish them. You can't make them public, right? So um, I've done. I will put a link to the Good Food Awards 15th anniversary uh, uh, post. I did a podcast on that, an episode of Pod Safe Chocolate and this. But when I could critique the Good Foods Awards judging, to the best of my knowledge, while there are rules and regulations about entering products into the awards, right? So here are the rules, right? No more than 4 entries. If you win with a product in a Good Food Award one year, you have to wait a year before you can re-enter it. There's a non-refundable entry fee. So here are the rules and regulations, right? But there's no description, right? So it says the Good Food Foundation reserves the right to update the criteria, rules, and regulations. So, but there are no criteria, right, for how judging is done. Here we go, scoring. Yay, right? So, scoring. So the Good Food Awards are determined using scores from the blind tasting as well as a vetting. They don't describe what that is. So this is how they do that, but they don't actually talk about how they're done. And that's actually a challenge for them, because they got all these categories. They need to develop judging rubrics for each one of these categories, right? Which is non-trivial to do. However, it's an absolute necessity. So there was no rubric when I was judge in 2015 in the confections category. So here's the judging rubric that I put together, because I was the head judge of a table. There were several tables of judges, usually 5 to 7 judges around a table. We'd be judging a series of flights of between 7 and 9 pieces in a flight, right? And the rubric that I put together for 2015 was pretty simple. Rather than ask the judges to, put taste and aroma and execution of all those kinds of things, then give numerical and come up with the numbers, right? What I asked them to do is just for each entry. So for each entry, like entry 1 over here, right? Is it the first on your list, the second on your list, the third on your list? So rank order your favorites, whatever that meant. The one you liked the best, the one that was your favorite, the one you think deserved an award, right? Using a phrase like that. Just take all of the pieces in the flight that you're looking at and then rank order the first 5. And then going around to each judge, we did a tally. So for entry 1, right, judge 1, did you give it a first place, a second place, a third or a fourth or a fifth place? Or was it lower than that? Right? And in the end, what we did is we just tallied up the tallies. The entry that had the most first points tallies, right, would end up being moving forward. The entry that had the second place tallies would end up in second place. And it turns out it was usually pretty obvious, right, which ones of things. So there was almost unanimous agreement among the judges about what the first place should be for each of the flights that we're doing, which I found really, really interesting. There was usually a very, very clear favorite for second. And there was sometimes some discussion over, the next 2 items. So should this item be third and go on to the next round of judging, or are we going to drop it down into fourth? And so it turns out that, right, without a formal judging rubric, right, like there is for the International Chocolate Awards, and you're sitting down with a bunch of judges, you don't have a chance to talk to the judges for any length of time before you actually sit down and start judging. A rubric like this gets the job done really, really quickly, and you are relying on the professionalism and experience of the judges, right? And then, for example, if you've got a judge who's a retailer, right, you can say, well, we can talk about this. Well, I want this on the shelf of my store, right? For example, that would, and I don't want this on the shelf of my store. That's a good way to think about it. So you can give each judge the hook that they want or that they need to help them understand how to place things. Oh my gosh, another typo. I'm going to go fix that. Anyway, so I hope you get the idea. So this, if you're doing any kind of judging at all, right? This is a great way to do it. So I took advantage of this idea when I was being a judge at the Southwest Chocolate and Coffee Festival, not in 2025, but in 2024. And we were doing there was a baking competition. So I sat down with my judges. I looked at the judging rubric, and I said to everybody, "Listen, it's just going to be easier if what we do is we sit down and we rank order these things rather than trying to say, well, taste gets this percentage and texture gets that percentage. And how do you have a common judging rubric if some things are cakes and some things are bonbons? You have all these different entries, and you really do need to look at them using different sets of criteria. You need to judge cakes as cakes and pastries as pastries and bonbons as bonbons, right? And so this turns out to be a really, really useful approach when when this is a last minute thing, or you've got judges which are coming from a lot of different places. To some extent, this is the way we did the innovation awards for the Craft Chocolate Challenge. Just so you know, although we weren't rank ordering them, just every judge said, here are the three that I want to nominate for an innovation award, and the entry that got the most nominations, right, got one. Then the entry that got the second most received an award. The entry that got the third most won the award. It's a good way to do it when you trust your judges, right? When you've got good people working. When you go take a look at the Chocolate Alliance Northwest Chocolate Festival judging, it turns out that this is a blank slate. So here is the page for the current Northwest Chocolate Festival and the Global Awards. I mean, this is the current page, and this is what they've current published. This is live. I am not making this up. And you go take a look at it, and it says the world's best chocolate, but we're talking about this is for 2024. So this page is at least a year old, right? And guess what? And this information about 37 countries and 1,000 products. I mean, 2023 award cycle, this is not current. We're here in 2025. There's no information here. And they really want to focus, but there's nothing, right? We don't have any award winners. There's no list of award winners here. Nothing. Meet the judges. Don't know who the judges were for the round. It makes no sense to me why we have this here. And then please visit the Chocolate Alliance for the 2022 awards. And it turns out the website is down, right? So you can't go there right now. I did actually go to like, is it up for me, and other kind of website checkers. And it turns out that this is not just unreachable from where I am, it's unreachable. And so I would, right, if you're going to be an entrant in the Chocolate Alliance competition at the Northwest Chocolate Festival, I would want to have more information from the organizers about what the judging is, how it's approached, who the judges are, and all that kind of stuff. Because right now there is literally no information available. I cannot get to the list of past winners, right? I do not know who the winners were for this 2024 round, right? There's no information whatsoever available on the website. And that's a problem for me, right? I would like to be able to talk to you about the rubric that they use, but I can't. There's a complete and total lack of transparency about how this judging is done at the moment, right? All I can do is judge soup, yeah, chocolatealliance.com. Took too long to respond. So before you enter, you're going to want to ask the organizers what the process is, how did they go about judging, who the judges are, and things like that. So along all this way, I just want to tidy the knot here. Um, After I did the chocolate file rating system, what I did is I ended up developing a system that was simpler, right? That communicated what it is I was looking for, and it had 5 levels, 0 to 4. And it came out. The realization for this came out of an article I was asked for Yahoo Personals about how to buy chocolate. So how do you buy chocolate for someone you know? How do you buy chocolate for someone you don't know? So I was thinking about this. So I was thinking about the judging process again, me personally, based on an entirely different context. And so my general advice when I'm doing that is if you're buying chocolate for someone you know, then what you should do is purchase something that reflects what you know about that person. So if you know that they don't like something, don't buy chocolate that's got those flavors. If you know they love something, you know they're an adventurous eater, go and buy adventurous flavors. If you know they're not an adventurous eater, don't go buy an adventurous flavors. Very, very simple kinds of stuff like that. But you're thinking about how do I go about judge a chocolate, rate, review a chocolate, right? And I'm not going to be the one who's consuming it. I'm making a recommendation. So it's a different way of thinking about the same process, importantly. Right? And then the advice I gave in Yahoo Personals is how do you buy chocolate for someone you don't know? Right? And you do that by picking chocolates that tell a story about who you are. So if you're doing this for a date you want to impress, you go in and say, rather than going about a huge box of chocolate that has no value of anything other than maybe its brand, right? You can say, here are 2 pieces of chocolate, and this one reminds me of X, and this one reminds me of Y, and I wanted to tell you the story about and share my story with you. So again, very, very different way about thinking about judging chocolate, critiquing judging, and figuring out how to purchase chocolate. And what that ended up doing, sort of in the 2000, late 2000 aught. So this is around the time the Chocolate Life. Um, I moved from chocolatefile.com to the Chocolate Life around the time that Discover Chocolate was written. So 2006, 2007, 2008. I had this emotional rating system which says, and for me, right, a 0. So it's odd, right? So that's the important. But a 0 was not only would I never buy this, I wouldn't eat it if it were given to me, right? And then number 1 was I would seek this out. I would not seek it out, but if somebody gifted to me, I would eat it, right? So number 2 is I like this enough to buy it. Another typo. I'm gonna have to go fix that on a regular basis, right? Number 3 was I would gift this to someone I wanted to impress. And number 4 is keep your hands off, right? This is mine, right? So the idea was that not necessarily that somebody would go and adopt my specific descriptions, right? I wasn't asking people to say that the only way to describe a 0 was not only would I never buy it, but I wouldn't eat it if it were gifted to me. That's not the only way to think about the concept. What you want to do is you want to go in and you want to write these descriptions for yourself. Right? And what you're doing is you're telling people how you feel about it, is your emotional connection to chocolate. And to some extent, I think that's perhaps one of the most valuable ways to think about chocolate, right? Because chocolate generates emotional connections in ways that most other foods do not. There is a connection to childhood and things like that. And so you can give something a 4, right, if it evokes a real strong childhood memory, right? So it's very, very flexible. It tells people how you think about whatever it is that you're eating. And so sometimes I would add to my 0 rating, I would not regift the chocolate to anyone whose opinion mattered to me. Right? So again, just straightforward. It's a very, very simple 0 to 4. 0 is nah, 4 is keep your hands off. Right? It's really, really simple, easy to understand. There's, like there's no 2.7, there's no 3.5. It's just really, really simple and straightforward. But I think that going forward, what I'm going to concentrate on, again, so before I get to that, is this is the rubric for the Ecuadorian Cacao Innovation Awards. This is what I covered last Friday. There's a link at the top of the page where you can go take a look at it. But there are 4 top level categories: innovation, quality, market potential, sustainability. Within innovation, there are two levels: creativity and novelty, quality, sensory, craftsmanship, packaging. And it turns out that novelty, creativity, and consumer market potential just accounted for 70% of the score. That's something that I know as a judge, not something that necessarily other people know. Right? Um, it's an interesting approach to try to judge innovation. And again, I go into that in great detail in the previous episode. And there's a link to that all the way up here, judging innovation, the previous episode. But where I want to end this is the way I'm thinking about this moving forward. And it's sort of the culmination and combination of things that I've done since I introduced my first judging rubric back in 2001, which is a modified version of a tier list. And why a tier list? The answer is really, really simple. Tier lists are everywhere. Now, you can go to all of the corners of the internet, gaming. People understand what tier lists are, and they understand how to do it. They start off at S, superior, I assume. S, right? Most of it is based around a grading system: A, B, C, D, no, and F, A, B, C, D, F. So a normal tier list has an S, an A B, a C, a D, and an F. My problem with that is it's six, right? So you don't have a middle point, you have above average and below average. And so what I did is I added a seventh, right? So there's a S, A, B, 0, or O, the letter O, then C, D, F. So S is superior, no flaws, the best example of its kind. A, very good, nearly flawless. B is good, a step above ordinary. O is ordinary, right? I like O rather than average. Does what it says on the pack, nothing more. C is disappointing. It has a few redeeming features. D is very disappointing, off the mark in most respects. And F is a failure at all meaningful metrics. And again, the reason why I think that something like this works, right, is that it's easy to understand, right? In places, especially like the United States, where we have grading systems, A, B, C, D, F, everybody knows what that is, but there's no A plus, A minus, right? We're not trying to, adding an A plus and then an S minus. I mean, it takes this very, very simple 7-point system and it adds another 12, I think, levels to it, which makes it unwieldy. So it's really straightforward. There's enough discrimination in it, right? But the nice thing about it is that there are tools, right, which enable you to create tier lists. I don't think any of them has an O for ordinary, but there are tools where you can create and publish your own tier list. These things are memeable, they go viral. People really, really understand them. And so if I were moving forward and developing my own judging rubric, what I would want to do is I would want to take advantage of, right, just how commonly used things like um, tier lists are used by the public, right? And consider it. But I've presented a number of different rubrics. I think I've critiqued them, what I think the strengths are and what some of the weaknesses are of them. If you are going to enter some of these competitions, think about what is being judged, how it is being judged, tailor your entries about what you know about how it is that's being judged. If you're just keeping your own reviews, be methodical, right? Have a rubric, develop a rubric. It can change over time. Mine has changed over time. I've had at least 3 different ones over time, and I've had transitional forms between all of them, right? And so it's, but they have evolved as my tasting ability has evolved. They have evolved as my experience has evolved. And I think that's also very, very important, right? Reevaluate what you're doing on a regular basis. Don't think that just because this is the way you started, this is the way you have to finish. You can evolve in your approach. And I think it's really important. I think that anybody who's an honest reviewer is going to do that for themselves. But it's also really, really important that if you are publishing something like this, again, this is the for-profit part of it. If you're publishing these for other people, that what you do is you let everyone know how you are evaluating, what you're evaluating, how you're evaluating, if there is a scale, what the scale looks like, what the prompts for the scale are, all of that kind of stuff. That's what you should be doing. You should be very open and very transparent about what you're doing so that people can go, oh, hey, Clay, I like the way you rate and review, and I find that my taste matches the way you rate and review things. And so I am going to listen. I'm going to pay attention when you rate and review something the way you do, because I find it matches the way I do it. Right. That's what you're looking for. That's how you become well known. That's how you become trusted. Not necessarily well known, but it's how you become trusted. Right. Is that people see in you a proxy for themselves. Right. And the better a job you can do is explaining what and why and how you're doing it, and then explain the results, right? The more trusted you can be more quickly. Right? And you don't want to be in the Rex Reed kind of thing where, well, listen, that's just as valuable. People look at you, look at your reviews, and they say, well, 99 times out of 100, my opinion is very different from theirs. That's also useful information for people to have. But with that, I'm at the end of the hour. I want to thank everybody who's been a part of the episode today, and to say that this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. This episode of PodSafe Chocolate, like every episode, is sponsored by members of the Chocolate Life. If you're not a member, you can go click on the green button in the top nav. It should say join. If you're not a member and you're not signed in, and there's always a free membership if you do have the financial resources to support the work I do. Those financial resources are what makes these episodes possible, right? And that's it for today. I have no topic for this coming Friday set up yet. Don't know what's going to be. There's some things floating around in my mind. I have an idea, maybe an interesting research paper on fermentation, which was brought to my attention in my news feed yesterday. I may go do that. It's actually very, very interesting. And I think I'll spend the next couple of days learning how to interpret it. But with that, I want to say thank you, everybody, and remind you that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.